Sometimes, the people meant to protect us are the first to humiliate us, and in that dusty frontier town, under a sky painted the color of rust and regret, a young woman named Mabel Hargrove learned what it meant to be broken in public. The sun was sinking low over Clay Creek, bleeding into the wooden rooftops and shimmering off the sheriff's badge like firelight on tarnished brass. The whole town had gathered, boots lined on the porch rails, whispers curling like smoke. "Line 'em up," Sheriff Dalton barked, his voice cutting through the air like a whip. The women stood shoulder to shoulder in front of the saloon, some proud, some trembling. Each one wore their best dress, trying to look worth choosing. And at the end of that line stood Mabel. Her dress was pale blue. It used to belong to her mother, but it strained at the seams around her hips, and her hands clutched at the fabric like she could make herself smaller by holding tight enough. A boy laughed from the crowd. Look at her, she'd break the wagon before they made it home. The laughter rolled through the street, harsh, unkind, echoing off the empty windows like glass about to crack. Mabel didn't lift her head. She'd learned that when you're the punchline, eye contact just feeds the fire. The sheriff smirked, spitting tobacco into the dirt. He turned to the tall, broad-shouldered rancher standing in front of him. "All right, Carver, you heard the rules," the sheriff said, half a grin tugging at his lip. "You earned your land, your brand, your right to a wife. So go on, cowboy. Choose any woman you want." The man beside him didn't move right away. Luke Carver, quiet, stoic, weathered by wind and silence. He'd lost more than folks knew, and he wore it like a coat too heavy to take off. The crowd watched him, men grinning, women holding their breath. Luke stepped forward slowly, boots stirring dust. His hat shadowed his eyes, but his presence alone made the laughter soften. He passed the first woman, young, slim, eyes sharp as glass. She fluttered her lashes. He passed the second, blonde curls, painted lips, the town's favorite. She straightened her back, already smiling. He passed the third and the fourth, and then he stopped at the end of the line where Mabel stood, trembling. Her heart was pounding so loud it drowned out everything else. The crowd waited for the punchline, the cruel joke they expected. Luke's hand lifted, slow, sure, and he tipped his hat toward her. "I'll take her," he said simply. The street went silent. No laughter. Not yet. Just confusion. Then the sheriff's laugh broke it, sharp, mean, filling the space like thunder. "You serious, Carver? That one? You could have any gal here." Luke's voice was quiet, even. "I know," whispers exploded around them. "Must have lost his mind. She'll eat him out of house and home. Maybe he's blind." Mabel felt the heat rise in her face, tears pressing behind her eyes. She wanted the ground to open, to swallow her whole. Her voice barely escaped her throat. "Sir, you don't have to." He cut her off, not harshly, but firm. "I said I'll take you." The sheriff's smirk faded into something else, discomfort, maybe. Luke reached into his vest pocket, placed a folded paper on the table, and signed his name. The deal was done. The crowd's laughter came back then, uglier than before, the kind that stings because it's not about humor anymore. It's about cruelty. Mabel's fingers trembled as she tried to steady her shawl. She didn't look up, didn't dare. The sheriff handed Luke a certificate with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Well, Carver, guess we'll see how long that one lasts." Luke turned, his expression unreadable. "You done talking, Sheriff?" The sheriff blinked, caught off guard. Luke didn't wait for an answer. He took Mabel's small bag from beside her feet, lifted it easily, and nodded toward his wagon waiting at the end of the street. "Let's go." She hesitated, glancing at the crowd faces she'd known all her life, now twisted with scorn. A woman she'd once called a friend whispered loudly, "She'll slow him down before they hit the county line." Mabel swallowed hard, her voice barely a breath. "Yes, sir." She followed him through the dust. The jeers faded behind her, replaced by the creak of wagon wheels and the soft jingle of reins. Each step felt like walking through a dream she didn't ask for. She could feel their eyes burning into her back, judgment, pity, curiosity, and beneath it all, a strange, stubborn whisper inside her chest. "Don't cry, not here, not now," the sheriff called out one last time. "Good luck, Carver. Hope she fits through the door." More laughter. Luke paused mid-step. His shoulders tightened, but he didn't turn around, only said, low and calm, "You ought to watch your mouth, Sheriff." Then he climbed onto the wagon, offering her a hand. Maybelle looked at it, rough, scarred, steady, no pity in it, just strength. She took it. The wagon rattled forward, leaving the laughter behind, but the sound lingered in her ears like a wound that wouldn't close. As the town shrank in the distance, she dared to glance at him. He didn't look her way, just stared ahead, reins firm in his hands, jaw tight. She wanted to thank him, but the words wouldn't come. So she sat there in silence, the wind pulling at her hair, her heart a storm of confusion and shame. And somewhere between the fading town and the open plains, she realized, this man didn't choose her out of kindness. He chose her for a reason she couldn't yet see. The sun dipped lower, setting fire to the horizon. The wagon rolled on, dust curling behind them like ghosts. Her old life was gone, burned away in the laughter of that street. Whatever waited ahead, it would test what little of her heart was left unbroken. The wheels groaned over dry ruts as the wagon rolled beyond the edge of town. Even the wind felt different out here, colder, lonelier. The echo of laughter still clung to Maybelle's ears, like a stain she couldn't wash off. For a long while, neither of them spoke. Only the steady rhythm of hooves against hard earth filled the silence. Luke sat beside her, back straight, eyes fixed on the long road ahead. He looked like a man used to quiet, one who spoke only when words mattered. She folded her hands in her lap, twisting her mother's old ring around her finger. Every turn of that ring was a memory of kitchens filled with whispers, of children snickering behind her back, of mirrors she'd avoided since she was 12. The wagon hit a bump, and she gasped softly. Luke's voice broke the silence, low and rough as gravel. "You hurt?" She shook her head quickly. "No, sir." A pause. Only the creak of the reins. He nodded once and said nothing more. The sky stretched wide and endless, painted gold and crimson. In the fading light, Maybelle glanced at him again. His face was cut by shadows, jawline sharp, expression unreadable. She wanted to ask why her. Wanted to understand the reason behind that one impossible moment. But the words died before reaching her lips. She'd been mocked enough for one day. The wagon climbed a rise, the wheels rattling against stone. Below, the valley opened up, fields, dry creeks, the faint shimmer of barbed wire fencing catching sunset light. Luke's land. It looked like freedom, but it also looked like exile. He pulled the reins gently. "We'll make camp here. You can rest." She nodded, though her body was still trembling. When he stepped down, she tried to follow but stumbled on her skirt. Before she could fall, his hand caught her elbow. Easy. It wasn't soft, but it wasn't cruel either, just steady, real. He helped her down like she weighed nothing at all. Maybelle's breath caught not from touch, but from the shock of being handled without disgust. He busied himself with the horses, loosening saddles, checking straps. She stood there for a moment, unsure where she fit in this strange silence. Finally, she whispered, "I can help, if you tell me what to do." He looked at her, eyes the color of ash and sky. "Don't need help with this. You can start a fire if you know how." She nodded quickly and crouched beside the dry patch of dirt, her fingers trembling as she gathered brush. It took her 3 tries to spark it, her hands clumsy, mind still echoing with every cruel word from town. When the first flame flickered to life, she felt tears threaten again, not from sadness, but relief. Something about that little light made her feel human again. Luke sat across the fire from her, arms resting on his knees, hat tilted back. For a moment, neither of them looked away. He finally said, "You shouldn't listen to them." She swallowed. They weren't wrong. His gaze didn't shift. They were loud. That don't make him right. The fire cracked between them, warm and slow. She looked down, unsure how to hold that kind of kindness. It felt heavier than cruelty ever did. After a while, he spoke again, quieter this time. "I didn't pick you to make a point, Maybelle." Her heart stopped. She looked up, startled that he even knew her name. He went on, "You were the only one not pretending." She frowned softly. "Pretending?" He nodded, eyes lost somewhere beyond the flames. "The rest wanted to be chosen. You just wanted to disappear." Her chest tightened. He'd seen that scene through her like no one else ever had. She didn't know what to say, so she didn't. She just watched him, watched the way the light bent around his features, rough and real. After a long silence, she whispered, "I don't understand you." "You don't have to," he said simply. He stood then, tossing another log onto the fire. Sparks rose into the night air, vanishing into stars. When he turned back, his face was half shadow. "You'll ride with me tomorrow. We'll reach the ranch by sundown." She nodded, her voice barely a breath. "Yes, sir." He hesitated for a moment longer, then added, "There's a blanket in the wagon. Take it. Nights get cold out here." Her throat tightened. "Thank you." Luke gave a small nod and walked a few paces away, bedding down by the horses. Maybelle sat alone beside the fire, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. The warmth didn't chase away the ache in her chest, but it dulled the edges of it. For the first time in years, no one was laughing. No one was watching her body like it was something to mock. Just wind, stars, and the sound of a man who didn't waste words. She whispered into the dark, voice trembling, "Maybe I ain't nothing after all." The prairie didn't answer, but the fire seemed to breathe in response a low hum of comfort she hadn't felt since childhood. In the distance, Luke stirred, turning slightly toward her voice, but saying nothing. His eyes opened for a moment, catching the firelight, and though neither spoke again, something unseen settled between them, a fragile truce born out of dust and dignity. The moon rose high, pale and watchful, and Maybelle drifted into sleep beside the crackling fire. Her dreams were soft, strange, of open doors and gentle hands. When dawn came, gold spilled across the plains like mercy. Luke was already saddling the horses, his motions precise, quiet. Maybelle stirred, clutching the blanket close. Her hair was tangled, her eyes still heavy, but there was a faint calmness to her face, now like someone who'd survived the worst storm and still had breath left. She stood slowly, dusting off her skirt. "I can help," she said again, this time steadier. Luke looked at her for a long moment before handing her the water canteen, then pour. Their eyes met not with warmth yet, but with a strange respect that neither understood. As they climbed onto the wagon, the wind rose, carrying the faint echo of the town's laughter from miles behind, but it no longer cut as deep. The sound was fading, like the ghost of a life she'd already left behind. Luke flicked the reins, the horses moved forward, and the road stretched ahead wide, unknown, waiting. The sun climbed higher, and in its light, Maybelle held her chin just a little higher too. Her story had been written in whispers and mockery. But this road was going to rewrite her name. Sometimes the road doesn't take you away from your pain, it just stretches it thinner, until you can breathe between the cracks. The morning after they left Clay Creek, the sky was already burning. The kind of heat that dries sweat before it can fall. Dust swirled in lazy spirals behind the wagon as Maybelle Hargrove sat beside Luke Carver, her hands folded tight in her lap. He hadn't said much since sunrise. Didn't have to. The sound of the reins, the horse's steady rhythm, and the occasional creak of the wheels filled every space that silence couldn't. She watched the horizon, a long, unbroken line that felt like judgment. Each mile carried her farther from the laughter that haunted her, yet she still heard it in every gust of wind. Luke adjusted his hat against the glare. "You ain't eaten since dawn." She shook her head quickly. "I'm fine, sir." He glanced sideways. "You call me sir one more time, I might forget my own name." A small, awkward smile tried to form on her lips. "What should I call you, then?" "Luke'll do." She nodded, staring back at the horizon. Yes, she caught herself, then whispered, "All right, Luke." He didn't reply, but she thought she saw the corner of his mouth twitch, not quite a smile, more like a man remembering how. The sun climbed higher, pressing on them like a weight. Maybelle pulled her shawl tighter, though it was too hot to need it. Every bump in the road jostled her thoughts, flashes of faces from town, voices that would not let her be. Luke Carver and the big one. She could almost hear them sneer. What's he want with her? She bit her lip until it hurt, trying to silence ghosts. Luke spoke again, voice low, steady. "You ever been this far west?" She shook her head. "No, never left Clay Creek." "You'll get used to the open." "I don't think I'm made for open," she said softly. He glanced at her, not judging, just listening. "Maybe open's made for you," he said after a pause. "It don't ask questions." She looked away, blinking hard. The wind tugged at her hair, freeing strands that danced across her cheek. He noticed the way the sunlight caught the brown in her curls, the way she tucked them back shyly, unaware anyone was watching. The road wound through tall grass now, golden and whispering in waves. From the crest of a hill, the world opened endless plains, far off mountains softened by heat haze. Luke slowed the wagon, letting the horses breathe. "That there's the edge of my land," he said quietly. Maybelle leaned forward. It looked nothing like she imagined. No grand fences, no fancy house, just raw, honest land. A lone windmill stood crooked in the distance, turning slow as thought. She swallowed. "It's wide, too wide for one man," he muttered. She looked at him then, and for the first time saw something in his face, weariness, old and buried deep. He flicked the reins again, guiding the wagon downhill. "Lost a lot here, but it's home." She wanted to ask who he'd lost, but the look in his eyes stopped her. Some griefs had walls built around them, and she was still a stranger outside the gate. The afternoon stretched long. The horses slowed, their coats glistening with sweat. Maybelle offered the canteen toward him. "You should drink." He took it without hesitation, sipped once, then passed it back. "You too." Her hands brushed his for a second, rough skin meeting trembling fingers. A small shock of warmth ran through her chest. She looked away quickly. The silence that followed wasn't empty this time. It carried something unspoken, not comfort, not yet, but a soft understanding that neither dared name. Hours passed. The sky turned bronze. They crossed a shallow creek, the water splashing against the wheels, cool and clean. Maybelle dipped her fingers in as they passed, letting the chill wash away the dust clinging to her skin. She whispered, almost to herself, "Feels like starting over." Luke's voice came quiet from beside her. "Maybe that's what it is." She turned her head, searching his expression, but he was still looking straight ahead. They rode until the light began to fade. Shadows stretched long across the plain, and the air cooled. Far off, she saw the faint outline of a barn-weathered wood, one side patched with tin. Beyond it, a small house stood under a leaning oak. Her heart thudded in her chest. That was it, his ranch, her new life. As they rolled up the path, a dog barked, not meanly, just curious. A few chickens scurried from the wagon's path, feathers glinting in the last sunlight. Maybelle's breath caught. It was small, yes, but alive, and it felt more real than anything she'd known in town. Luke pulled the horses to a stop in front of the porch. "End of the road," he said softly. She stared at the house 2 steps up, a front door with chipped paint, curtains drawn tight. No voices, no laughter, just stillness. She turned toward him, uncertain. "Where should I?" He climbed down, landing heavy on the ground. "Come on," she followed, clutching her bag close. When her foot hit the dirt, she felt the weight of everything she'd left behind settle in her bones. Luke opened the door with a slow creak. Inside, it was dim. One table, 2 chairs, a fireplace cold and waiting. The air smelled faintly of cedar and loneliness. He set his hat on the hook by the door, glanced back at her. "You'll sleep inside." Her eyes widened. "Inside, I thought. Maybe the barn." He cut her off gently. "You'll sleep inside. It ain't pity, it's respect." The words hung in the air like something sacred. Maybelle's throat tightened. She wanted to thank him, but her voice wouldn't work. So she nodded, tears threatening, and set her bag down quietly beside the wall. Luke moved toward the stove, striking a match. The flame caught, spreading soft orange light across the room. For the first time since that cursed day in Clay Creek, she felt something stir beneath her shame. Not pride, not yet, but worth. He glanced at her once more before stepping out to tend the horses. "Make yourself at home, Maybelle." She stood there long after he was gone, hands trembling over the small warmth of the fire. The house creaked softly around her, like it was waking up again after too many silent years. And when she finally sat at the table, staring at her reflection in a pot of water, she whispered to herself, "Not for him, not for anyone else. I'll try." The first morning at the Carver Ranch began before the sun. Maybelle woke to the sound of boots on the porch, a low whistle, and the soft snort of horses outside. The air inside was cold. Her breath fogged faintly as she sat up, wrapping the worn quilt around her shoulders. Through the cracked window, she could see him, Luke Carver, already moving like a man who hadn't known rest in years. She watched him from the shadows, the quiet strength in his movements, the way he tied the saddle, checked the rope, rubbed a horse's neck before leading it out. No words, no noise, just work. Something about that steadiness, it calmed her. She rose, tucked her hair back, and went to the stove. There was a small bag of flour, a jar of beans, and 2 eggs in a bowl. Not much, but enough. She started a fire, working by instinct and memory. Back home, her ma used to say, "If you can feed a man, you can steady him." She didn't know if that was true, but she needed something to do besides think. By the time Luke stepped back inside, the smell of warm bread filled the air. He paused, hat in hand, surprised. "You been up long?" She turned, nervous. "Couldn't sleep much. Hope you don't mind." He set his hat on the table, eyes scanning the pan. "You cooked all this?" She shrugged. There wasn't much else to do. He sat slowly, nodding once. "Smells better than I deserve." She gave a faint laugh, quiet but real. "I doubt that." They ate mostly in silence. But it wasn't the kind of silence that hurt. It was steady, soft like the space before a storm clears. Halfway through breakfast, he looked up from his plate. "You don't have to stay if it don't feel right," he said quietly. "You ain't bound to me by law, Maybelle." She froze. "I know that. I just mean, this place has got ghosts. Ain't easy living with what's left behind." Her voice was small but certain. "I've been living with ghosts too, Luke. Different kind, maybe, but they whisper the same." He didn't answer, just nodded a long, thoughtful nod, then finished his coffee and stood. "I'll be fixing the fence by the north line today. You can rest or look around if you like." She wanted to help, to prove her worth. But the words stayed stuck in her throat. When he left, she stepped outside for the first time. The land stretched wide and quiet. Grass bent with the wind, the barn leaned under its own age, and a hawk circled above the far hills. Maybelle breathed in deep. The air was different here, raw, clean, unjudging. For the first time in years, no one was staring at her. She walked slowly toward the barn. Inside, it smelled of hay and horse sweat and rain that once leaked through the roof. In the corner, a small wooden chest sat half, covered by a tarp. She lifted it carefully. The hinges creaked open to reveal folded shirts, a pocket knife, and a child's wooden toy horse. Her hand froze. She understood now. Luke's loss wasn't just a story. It was carved into every wall of this place. She set the lid back down gently, whispering, "I'm sorry," though he wasn't there to hear it. Later that day, she saw him again by the fence, sleeves rolled, sweat darkening his shirt, movements slow but strong. Something about that image stayed with her, a man building what the world had already broken. She walked up, hesitant. "Can I help?" He didn't look up. "You know how to handle wire?" She smiled faintly. "No, but I can learn." He handed her the spool without question. "Then start there." For the next hour, they worked side by side. He showed her how to twist the wire, how to keep her hands steady. Once, when she cut her finger on the edge, he took her hand quickly, wrapping it with his handkerchief before she could protest. His touch was rough, but gentle, like he'd forgotten how to be either, and was remembering in real time. Their eyes met, and something in both of them went still. No words, just breathe, wind, and a quiet truth neither would admit. By sunset, the fence stood repaired, uneven, but standing. Luke wiped his brow, nodded toward the horizon. "That'll hold for now." Maybelle smiled softly. "Not bad for my first day." He gave a small grin. "You did fine, Maybelle." As they walked back, the air cooled again. The last light turned the world gold. The land felt almost forgiving. That night, after supper, they sat by the fire. Luke leaned back in his chair, boots crossed, staring into the flames. Maybelle sat across from him, mending a torn shirt she'd found in the chest. After a while, he spoke slow, deliberate. "My wife, Sarah, she passed 5 winters ago. Fever took her and the boy." Maybelle's hand stilled, needle frozen mid-stitch. He continued, voice low. "I buried them by the oak out back. Thought I'd follow soon after, but the land kept needing me." She swallowed hard. "I'm sorry." He nodded once. "Don't be. World don't stop turning for sorrow." Then he looked at her, really looked. "You lost something too, didn't you?" She tried to smile, but her voice cracked. "Only myself." He didn't push, just turned back to the fire, letting her silence speak for her. They sat there, 2 broken souls surrounded by the ticking of the clock and the quiet crackle of wood. And for the first time, it didn't feel like loneliness. When she finally stood to go, he said softly, "Maybelle." She turned at the doorway. "This place, it don't heal easy, but it don't judge neither." Her eyes glistened in the firelight. "Then maybe it's where I belong." He didn't answer, but she saw it, the smallest nod, the faintest warmth in his eyes. As she closed the door behind her that night, Maybelle leaned against the wall, hand over her chest. The world outside was silent except for crickets and the faint rustle of wind through dry grass. She whispered to herself, "Don't run this time. Don't hide." For the first time in her life, she meant it. Days passed like soft whispers on the wind. The Carver Ranch settled into rhythm, 2 souls learning to breathe in the same silence. Maybelle woke each dawn before the sun, swept the porch, gathered eggs, and boiled coffee. Luke worked the fields, mended harnesses, broke the quiet only to ask if she'd seen the hammer or if there was more salt. They didn't need much talk. The air between them carried its own language. Yet beneath the peace, something else lingered, a trembling undercurrent neither dared touch. Because peace was fragile, and both had lived long enough to know it never lasted. That morning, the horizon was streaked with gray. Clouds rolled low and heavy, the smell of rain clinging to the air. Luke stood by the corral, watching the sky. Storms coming. He murmured. Maybelle joined him, wiping her hands on her apron. "Big one," he nodded. "Could be. Fence'll need checking after." The wind caught her shawl, pulling it loose. Luke reached without thinking, caught it before it flew. Their hands met, warm against the chill. For a moment, neither moved. Then he let go, clearing his throat. Best get inside before it hits. But the storm wasn't only in the sky. By noon, rain slammed the plains. The house shuddered. Thunder cracked like gunfire. Luke had pulled the horses into the barn, drenched to the bone by the time he returned. Maybelle hurried to meet him with a towel. "You'll freeze if you keep standing there." He laughed, the first real sound of laughter she'd heard from him. "You giving orders now?" She smiled shyly. "Someone has to." He dried his hair, dropped the towel over a chair. "You always talk this bossy when there's thunder. Only when someone's too stubborn to care for himself." He looked at her, then really looked. The lamplight softened her round cheeks, her damp hair clinging in curls against her neck. There was something alive in her eyes, something unbroken. For a second the room held its breath, then thunder rolled again, shaking the windows. Luke stepped back, busying himself with the fire. Storm will pass by morning. Maybelle folded her hands, watching the flames dance. "It's been years since I felt safe during thunder," she whispered. "Always made me feel small, like the world was reminding me how powerless I am." Luke's voice came low, steady. "Ain't powerless now." She turned toward him. "You think not." He met her gaze. "You built peace in a place that forgot how. Don't call that powerless." The words landed deep. She wanted to answer, to thank him, but her voice failed. Instead, she simply nodded and looked away, hiding the tears that dared to rise. Outside, the storm howled on, wild and relentless. Hours passed. When the thunder finally faded into a slow, steady drizzle, Luke stood by the window, watching the sky lighten just enough to reveal the fields again. But something else caught his eye, faint movement at the far gate. He narrowed his gaze, a rider half hidden by mist, moving slow, his jaw tightened. Maybelle noticed. "What is it?" He didn't answer at first. Then, without turning, he said, "Stay inside." He grabbed his coat, pulled the rifle from the rack, and stepped out into the rain. Maybelle's heart raced. She moved to the window, clutching the curtain tight. The rider drew closer, a tall man in a dark slicker, horse steaming from the wet. He stopped just short of the porch. Luke's voice cut through the rain. "You lost." The man dismounted, brushing his hat. "Not lost, Carver. Just looking for conversation." That voice, cold, slick with arrogance, sent a shiver through Maybelle. Luke stiffened. "Clay Creek's a long ride for talk." The man smiled thinly. "Word travels, Luke. Folks been whispering how the lonely rancher brought home the fat girl they all laughed at." Maybelle froze behind the curtain, blood draining from her face. Luke's grip on the rifle tightened. "You done?" The man tilted his head. "Don't get riled. Just strange is all. You could have had any woman in that room, but you chose her. Why's that?" Luke's jaw clenched. "Because I ain't like you." The man smirked. "Maybe not, but the town's still talking. Sheriff says you've gone soft, that maybe the land's not the only thing you're trying to fix." Rain poured harder, but Luke didn't move. His voice came low, dangerous. "You best ride back before you say something you can't swallow later." The stranger chuckled, swinging into the saddle. "Ain't meant offense, Carver. Just making sure the stories are true." He turned the horse with a sharp tug. "Tell your girl the boys at the saloon still remember her name." Then he rode off, the storm swallowing him whole. Luke stood there long after he was gone, rain dripping from his hat, rifle heavy in his hands. He didn't need to look, he knew she'd heard every word. When he finally stepped back inside, Maybelle was standing by the window, pale and trembling. "You knew he was from town," she whispered. "Yeah." Her voice broke. "They still laugh at me, Luke. Even here, where they can't see me." He set the rifle down, stepped closer. "Let them laugh. They don't get to own you anymore." Tears spilled down her cheeks. They already did. Every word they said, every look, still lives in me. Luke's voice hardened. "Then kill it. Don't feed it." She stared at him, shaking. "You make it sound easy." He softened. "It ain't, but it's the only way." For a moment, they just stood there, stormlight flickering between them, both breathing heavy, both chained by memories they didn't ask for. Finally, Luke spoke again. "You stay here. I'll deal with Clay Creek." Her eyes widened. "No, please don't go back there." "I ain't going for them. I'm going for peace." She shook her head, voice cracking. "They'll only twist it worse. You'll give them reason to talk again. He looked down, his tone gentler now. Maybelle, sometimes silence don't stop pain. Sometimes you gotta face the sound. She turned away, clutching her arms tight around herself. And if they hurt you, he smiled faintly, the tired kind. Ain't the first time I've been hurt, darlin'. The word slipped out before he could stop it. Darlin', it hung there, fragile and warm between them. Maybelle's breath caught. She didn't know whether to cry or run, so she did neither. Instead, she whispered, "Then I'm going too." He started to protest, but the look in her eyes stopped him. Cold fire, defiance, and a hint of something stronger than fear. "No, Luke," she said softly but firm. "If Clay Creek wants to see me, they will. But this time I won't bow." Outside, the last of the rain faded into a hush. The air smelled of wet earth and renewal. Luke nodded slowly. "All right then. Tomorrow we ride." The morning broke slow, pale, and quiet, the kind of dawn that hides its sorrow behind the mist. Smoke still rose from the blackened edges of the storm, but the air smelled of renewal, of something that had survived. Maybelle stood by the window in her plain blue dress, her hands trembling as she buttoned the last button. Her reflection in the glass wasn't the girl from the sheriff's line anymore, but she wasn't sure who stared back either. Behind her, Luke's boots creaked across the wooden floor. He didn't speak at first. He just stood there, tightening the strap of his worn leather belt, watching her with that same quiet. He always carried the kind that said more than words ever could. "You sure about this?" he finally asked. Maybelle nodded. "If I hide now, I'll never stop running. And I've been running my whole life." Luke lowered his gaze, a faint smile ghosting his lips. "Then let's ride." They saddled up as the sun broke through the thinning clouds. The horses snorted, eager, their hooves pressing deep into the wet earth. The trail to Clay Creek stretched like a scar, long, winding, and silent. Neither spoke for miles. The world around them was nothing but wind and memory. Halfway there, Luke glanced over. "When we get to town, stay close." "I'm not afraid," she said softly. "I didn't say you were." Her eyes met his. "Then why do you look like a man heading to war?" He turned away, reins tightening in his hands. "'Cause maybe I am." The rest of the ride passed in uneasy silence. When the town finally came into view, Maybelle's heart began to pound. The same wooden buildings, the same porch where laughter once echoed against her shame, the same dust that had swallowed her tears. She could still hear it, the sheriff. Mocking voice, the jeers, the heat of eyes that stripped her dignity clean. Now she rode back through those same streets, only this time, not as a trembling girl, but as the wife of the man they all called stoic, the rancher they respected but never understood. Every step of her horse felt like thunder against her chest. Whispers started almost instantly. "Is that her? Lord, she actually came back. Look at the size of her still. Bless her heart." Luke's jaw flexed, but he said nothing. His presence alone was enough to quiet half the street. Then came the sheriff, leaning against a post, chewing on a toothpick, like a man with too much time and too little soul. "Well, I'll be," he drawled, "if it ain't Mr. Carver and his prize." The laughter that followed was smaller, this time uncertain, nervous. Luke stopped his horse just a few feet away, his eyes cold as a winter creek. "You got something worth saying, Sheriff?" "Just curious what brings you two back to Clay Creek. Don't tell me she's here to shop for another man." Maybelle's breath hitched, but before Luke could speak, she slid down from her horse. Her boots hit the ground firm, sure. She straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, the same chin they once mocked for being too round, too proud for a woman like her. "Sheriff," she said, her voice steady, though her hands shook, "I came to thank you." That got his attention. "Thank me, yes," she said, eyes locking onto his, "because every word you said that day made me stronger. Every laugh, every sneer, I carried it like weight on my back, and now it's muscle. You helped build me, though I don't reckon that was your intention." The street fell silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The sheriff blinked, the toothpick still hanging from his lip. You got a sharp tongue for a woman who don't fit her own corset." Luke was off his horse in an instant. The crowd tensed, but Maybelle raised a hand, stopping him. Her voice dropped, quiet as thunder before the strike. "Maybe I don't fit a corset, Sheriff, but I fit something better." He smirked. "And what's that?" She stepped closer. "A man's respect, his home, his peace. Something you'll never fit, not with all the power you pretend to have." The words cut like cold steel. Luke's hand lowered. He didn't need to defend her, she was doing it herself. The sheriff's grin faltered. "Careful now, miss. Talk like that'll get you remembered." She smiled faintly. "Good. I came to be remembered." And with that, she turned her back on him, on the laughter, on the dust, on the years that had caged her heart. Luke watched her walk toward her horse, sunlight breaking through the clouds behind her, glinting off the damp curls at her neck. For the first time, he didn't see her as the girl they mocked. He saw her as something far greater, the storm that learned to build instead of break. He followed her up onto his horse, his voice low but sure. "You done what you came for." She nodded, tears glimmering at the corners of her eyes. "Yes. I left her here, the girl they laughed at." He reached over, his hand brushing hers on the reins. "Good. Let's ride home, Maybelle." As they turned down the trail, the crowd stayed frozen in silence, the sheriff's toothpick falling forgotten into the dust. The wind rose again, softer this time, carrying away the last echo of cruel laughter. For the first time in her life, Maybelle rode without shame on her shoulders. Only the weight of rain, sunlight, and the quiet knowing that she had survived what others wouldn't have dared face. The ranch came into sight by sundown. The house glowed warm through the evening haze. The girls ran out to meet them, laughing, skirts flying. Luke dismounted, lifted one girl into his arms, and watched Maybelle dismount slowly, every movement filled with new strength. "You did it?" he said softly. She smiled, a real smile this time. "No, Luke, we did." The sound of the wind shifted, carrying the faint hum of her voice, the same soft melody she sang while baking bread, now a hymn of quiet triumph. Luke stood beside her, hat in hand, watching as the last light kissed her face. She ain't the woman they laughed at, he thought. She's the one they'll never forget. Morning at the Carver Ranch arrived in soft hues of gold and amber, spilling over fields that had begun to breathe again under care. The wind carried scents of earth, hay, and faint smoke from the stove, the smell of life being stitched back together. Maybelle moved with quiet purpose, carrying water from the well and setting it down by the barn. Luke followed her, checking fence posts and listening to the horses snort and shift in their stalls. "You're early," he said, adjusting a splintered board. "Somebody has to keep this place from falling apart." She replied, voice light but firm. He glanced at her, noting the way she lifted the buckets, her strength hidden beneath round shoulders and soft curves. There was something about her quiet endurance that made the work feel less like toil and more like rhythm. Later, in the fields, the fence post snapped under the weight of wet wood. Luke muttered a curse under his breath, but Maybelle stepped forward without hesitation. "I can help," she said simply. He watched as she lifted the heavy post, grunting with effort yet never complaining. Her laughter broke free, unexpectedly bright, self-conscious, warm. Luke froze, mid-step, the world narrowing to that sound. It wasn't mockery, it wasn't forced, it was real. Something shifted in him, a stir of awareness he hadn't felt in years. "Careful," he said finally, masking his surprise with a low chuckle. "You'll put your back out." She grinned, brushing damp curls from her forehead. "I'll live. Besides, I've survived worse." The sun climbed higher, and they worked side by side. Luke handed her tools, small gestures of trust. She noticed the subtle care and extra firewood stacked just so, a nail hammered in precisely, a fence line smoothed for easier access. By afternoon, the barnyard was tidier, fences secured, and the horses calm. Maybelle paused, hands on her hips, breathing hard. "Not bad, huh?" Luke nodded. "Not bad at all." Then came the girls, Luke's nieces, peeking from behind the corner of the house. They had watched Maybelle since she arrived, wary of her presence, curious and cautious in equal measure. The younger one whispered, "Aunt Belle." Maybelle turned, startled, and froze. Luke's brow lifted slightly. "Go on, they're friendly." Tentatively, the girls approached. "Why? Died? You helped Uncle Luke?" the older one asked. "Yes," Maybelle said softly, "I helped." The girls glanced at each other, then back at her. Slowly, a small smile appeared. "Can you show us how to do it?" Maybelle's heart lifted. She nodded, crouching to demonstrate. The older girl mimicked her movements, clumsy but eager. The younger one giggled when she got the wire tangled. Luke watched from the fence line, boots dug in dirt, and felt something shift inside him. The house was no longer just walls and a roof. It had warmth, it had laughter, it had life. Later, as evening fell, Maybelle returned to the house to prepare supper. Luke's hand appeared at the doorway with an old wildflower tucked between his fingers. "For the kitchen," he said quietly. She stared at it, small, imperfect, but bright, a gesture that didn't need words but spoke volumes. "Thank you," she whispered, voice catching. "You earned it," he said simply. They moved inside, the fire crackling in the hearth. The girls hovered nearby, shy but lingering, watching her cook, learning. Maybelle hummed softly, melody she hadn't dared sing outside the barn. The sound filled the room, bending around furniture, dancing over the walls, soft as candlelight. Luke paused by the doorway, listening, catching her hands in the lamplight, strong, scarred, gentle. No words could capture it. Respect, admiration, something warmer, it all shimmered unspoken. As night fell, the girls finally called, "Aunt Belle, come sit." She hesitated, then joined them at the table. Luke took his seat across from them, watching her blend into the room, no longer a stranger, no longer the girl everyone mocked. Outside, the wind sighed, brushing the fields like a lullaby. The ranch was alive, and so was she, and somewhere in quiet between hearth and heart, Luke Carver realized the slow, steady transformation of trust had begun, all born from the simple endurance of a woman no one had believed in. The next morning brought sunlight streaking through the window, warming the kitchen where Maybelle stirred the morning coffee. Luke entered silently, hat in hand, watching her move. "You've got quiet hands," he said, voice low, almost teasing. Maybelle looked up, smiled faintly. "Been working quietly for years. You learn fast or break things." He leaned against the doorframe, studying her, the soft lines of her face, the warmth she carried in her presence. For a man like him, accustomed to hard labor and harder hearts, it was unsettling, this quiet, persistent strength. The day was full of chores, fences to mend, horses to groom, firewood to stack, but something had shifted. The rhythm of work was lighter now. The small gestures between them, subtle as the wind, carried meaning. Luke left her by the barn for a moment to fetch tools. When he returned, he found Maybelle laughing softly as the girls struggled with a bucket of water. Her laughter was unpolished, real. It startled him. He crossed the yard, crouched beside them, and helped steady the bucket. The girls giggled, huddling closer to her, calling her Aunt Belle. Luke's chest tightened. The house, the land, the women he loved like family, all slowly bending toward her warmth. And she didn't know it yet, but she had begun to matter more than anyone would admit aloud. By evening, a small fence post had fallen again, splintered and damp from the morning dew. Luke moved to lift it alone, but Maybelle was at his side, hands steady, muscles coiling with the effort. "You sure you want to do that?" he asked. "I've done heavier," she said simply, lips pressed together in determination. Her laughter broke again as she straightened the post. Luke, unaccustomed to hearing joy in such raw form, couldn't help but smile. Later, she found herself by the fireplace, mending a torn dress she discovered in the chest that had once belonged to Luke's late wife. The fabric was delicate, worn, precious, yet she stitched with care, imagining it as a bridge between the past and the present. Luke came in quietly, leaning on the doorway. He watched her hands move with precision and tenderness. Without a word, he took a needle and thread from her, tying a stubborn knot that had eluded her fingers. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed gratitude, respect, a flicker of something deeper. She smiled faintly, voice trembling. "Thank you." He nodded. "You don't have to thank me, just keep being you." The girls wandered in, curiosity tugging at their tiny feet. One shyly tugged her sleeve. "Can you teach us, Aunt Belle?" "Yes," she said, crouching to their level. "I'll show you. But you have to promise to be patient." They giggled, eager, and for a moment the room was filled with the sound of simple joy, a balm for long, aching wounds. Luke watched them, the fire casting flickering shadows across the walls. The house was no longer just a shelter from storms. It had become a place of beginnings of trust, laughter, and fragile, growing affection. Later, when supper was done and the dishes cleared, Maybelle stepped outside. Luke followed, leaning against the railing of the porch. "You did well today," he said. She looked at him, quiet, words caught between humility and pride. "I'm learning," she whispered, "learning what it feels like to matter." He gave a small nod, the faintest of smiles tugging at his lips. "Good," he said. "That's a start." For the first time, the house felt fully alive, not just with work, not just with the presence of people, but with heart. The wind brushed across the porch, carrying the faint scent of wildflowers Luke had left earlier. Maybelle breathed in deep, letting the moment settle, understanding in her bones that this slow, steady warmth was beginning to thaw what years of loneliness and shame had built. She turned toward Luke, voice soft. "I don't want to be just someone who helps around here. I want to belong." He looked at her, really looked, and for a moment the world shrank to the space between them. "You already do," he said quietly. Outside, the sky blushed with the last light of day, and the ranch, once cold and brittle, held them in its embrace. The day began heavy, the sky bruised with dark clouds that churned like a restless sea. The wind carried the scent of wet earth, the distant growl of thunder rolling low over the hills. Maybelle woke before dawn, the first raindrops tapping against the window like anxious fingers. Her stomach knotted with a mix of unease and anticipation. She had never known a storm like this, not the kind that rattles windows and shakes the heart. Luke was already outside, boots sunk in muddy earth, checking the horses and securing the loose boards on the barn. He didn't look at her. He never looked at her when danger was near. His attention was all measured, calm, lethal. She dressed quickly, pulling on her shawl and boots, and stepped into the rain. Cold droplets ran down her cheeks, but she didn't flinch. For the first time in a long while, fear was sharpened by determination, not paralysis. "You're sure about staying out here?" Luke called over his shoulder, voice steady but concerned. "I'm not leaving," she shouted back, brushing past him to help. The wind ripped at the barn's roof, snapping a loose shingle. Maybelle clutched the timber, straining with all her might. Luke grabbed her elbow. "Careful. That could crush you." She looked up at him, eyes wide. "I can handle it." He held her gaze for a second, measuring, then nodded, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement of her resolve. They moved as one, bracing the weakened structure against the battering storm. Hours passed, the rain unrelenting, the wind roaring like a living thing. Inside, the barn's rafters groaned, threatening to collapse under the pressure of the tempest. Maybelle's arms burned, her hands raw, but she didn't falter. Then it happened, a deafening crack, lightning striking the barn's roof, splitting a beam in half. Wood splintered, hay caught fire. Smoke filled the small space with the acrid bite of panic. Luke shouted, "Get back!" But Maybelle froze, eyes on the burning beam, her mind racing with fear and instinct. She could see the horses, panicked, struggling against their ropes. "No," she whispered, voice trembling but firm. "I won't leave them." Before Luke could stop her, she darted into the smoke, arms outstretched. She yanked ropes free, calmed the horses with her voice, guiding them out one by one into the rain-soaked yard. The heat licked at her arms, singeing the edges of her sleeves. Luke's heart nearly stopped. He charged forward, pulling debris aside to reach her. She's burning herself alive, he thought, fury and fear coiling together. By the time he reached her, her hands were bleeding, her hair damp with sweat and rain, but the horses were safe. He grabbed her arm, steadying her, their breaths mingling in the chaos. You could have been killed, he yelled, voice breaking with emotion. I couldn't leave them, she shouted over the roar of the storm. Her chest heaved, tears mixing with rain. I've spent my whole life being told I'm weak. Not today. Luke's anger melted into awe. He had never seen such courage, raw, unrefined, unstoppable. He looked at her, smoke curling around her hair, eyes fierce and alive. And for the first time he saw her not as the girl the town mocked, not as the fat one they laughed at, but as a woman who had fought fire and storm and survived. The barn was beyond saving, the fire spreading despite their efforts, but it no longer mattered. The horses were safe, they were alive. Maybelle sank to her knees in the mud, trembling, soaked, exhausted. Luke knelt beside her, wrapping his coat around her shoulders. You're insane, he said, but there was no anger in his voice, only reverence. She looked up at him, pain and pride warring in her gaze. I had to, she whispered. You saved me too, he said softly, saved more than you know. The storm continued to rage, but in that moment it felt smaller. The terror of the world had collided with the strength of a woman no one believed in, and she had emerged unbroken. As the rain softened, Luke helped her to her feet. They stood together in the wreckage of the barn, mud squishing under their boots, fire still smoldering in corners. The town might see destruction, might see a burned barn, but they would never see the courage, the endurance, the fire in her eyes. Luke took her hand, squeezing it gently. Come on, he said, voice low. Let's get home before it rains harder. And in that moment, Maybelle understood something profound. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one she had faced within herself, and she had survived. The fire raged through the barn, smoke twisting like black serpents into the sky. Maybelle stood at the edge of the yard, soaked, muddy, clinging to her skirts, heart hammering. Her arms burned, bruises forming from lifting fallen timbers, but she didn't move. She couldn't move, not until Luke was safe. Luke's voice cut through the roar of the storm, sharp with effort and strain. Maybelle, out of the barn. But she was already inside, pushing through smoke and flames. A splintered beam fell, and she ducked beneath it, dragging Luke's arm free from the rubble that pinned him to the floor. His eyes widened, disbelief flashing through the pain. You, he rasped. SHH, she said, voice trembling, firm. Just hold on. The fire licked at her sleeves, singed her hair, but she didn't falter. Each second stretched like an eternity, the barn groaning, threatening to collapse. She found him, trapped beneath a charred post. Luke tried to rise, pain contorting his features. Maybelle, get out. I can't leave you, she shouted, the smoke stinging her eyes. She gritted her teeth, muscles screaming, and lifted the beam just enough for him to roll free. Together, they staggered toward the door, coughing, burning, soaked with rain and sweat. Once outside, the cold rain hit their faces, a sharp relief against the heat of the fire. Luke collapsed onto the wet ground, breath coming in ragged gasps. Maybelle sank beside him, arms around him, shaking. You saved me, he whispered, voice thick with awe and exhaustion. She started, but her words caught in the smoke and rain. Instead, she just held him, letting the world roar around them. The townsmen arrived too late to save the barn, their horses splashing through the mud, eyes wide in shock. They saw her smoke, streaked, soaked, standing tall beside Luke Carver, the man they all thought untouchable. The sheriff blinked, silent for once, toothpick forgotten. The whispers spread, disbelief tangled with awe. By God, she did it, can't believe. She actually, Maybelle's chest heaved, but she didn't look at them. Her gaze stayed on Luke, whose hand found hers, squeezing lightly. No words were needed, the town had already seen her courage. As the embers glowed orange against the dark sky, Luke rose, brushing wet hair from his forehead. "Come on," he said quietly, "let's get inside." She followed, boots sinking into the mud, shoulders stiff, heart still racing. Inside the house, he helped her remove the wet shawl, draping it over a chair. "You okay?" he asked, voice low, steady. "I will be," she whispered. "And you?" "I'm alive," he replied, the faintest smile tugging at his lips. "Because of you." They moved to the fire, letting warmth seep back into their frozen limbs. The girls peeked from behind the doorframe, wide-eyed mouths open. They had seen fear, they had seen bravery, and in that moment they understood. You saved him?" the older niece asked softly. "Yes," Maybelle said, kneeling to meet their gaze. "I saved him, but more than that, I saved myself too." Luke watched her, noting the mud, the soot, the fire in her eyes. He had always respected her. Now he revered her. She wasn't just the girl they laughed at, she was the heart of the home, the fire in the storm. The storm finally broke, fading into a drizzle. Rain whispered over the land, carrying away smoke and ash, leaving a scent of wet earth and new beginnings. Maybelle stood by the doorway, watching the last flames die, catching her breath. Luke stepped beside her, hand brushing hers, steadying her in the quiet aftermath. "People will talk," he said softly. "Let them," she replied, voice calm, eyes bright. "They'll see the truth soon enough. I'm not the girl they mocked." Luke nodded. "No, you're not, you're stronger." The girls ran to her, wrapping small arms around her waist. Maybelle laughed softly, tears slipping down her cheeks. Luke watched, pride swelling in his chest. For the first time, the house, the ranch, the land, all of it felt whole again. The town had witnessed courage that no words could describe, and it had begun to rewrite the story they thought they knew. Sunday arrived slow and heavy. Sunlight filtered through the dusty windows of the little town church. The pews were filled with townsfolk, murmuring quietly, the air thick with judgment and curiosity. Everyone knew the story. The barn burned, the horses were saved, and the woman they once mocked had stood in the fire. Maybelle entered quietly, her dress still damp from morning chores, hair tied simply, eyes steady. Whispers rippled through the congregation. "She's the one," smoke on her sleeves. Luke's wife, in person. The sheriff leaned back in his chair, smug as ever, a toothpick dangling from his lips. Well, well, he muttered under his breath. "Let's see how this one holds up in front of everyone." Luke stood beside Maybelle, hand brushing hers lightly, a small anchor of strength. He didn't speak, not yet, letting her presence speak first. When the preacher rose, he paused, glancing at Maybelle, then at the sheriff. "The Lord has a way of showing truth where pride blinds men," he said softly, voice trembling slightly. Eyes shifted, whispers paused. The sheriff stood, voice carrying through the wooden hall. "Now, I don't want to make a fuss, but folks ought to know why Luke Carver chose this woman," he sneered. The congregation chuckled lightly, eyes darting between Maybelle and Luke. "She saved your life, didn't she?" a townsperson muttered, voice uncertain. Sheriff scoffed. "Pity, that's all it is. Nothing more." Maybelle felt her chest tighten. The old fear rose like smoke in her mind, but she steadied herself, shoulders squared, hands clasped calmly. Luke's eyes met hers, silent encouragement, the unspoken promise that she could speak her truth. She stepped forward, voice soft at first, trembling slightly. "I am not here for pity," she said, letting the words roll clear and strong. "I didn't save him because I wanted reward or praise, or to be remembered for who I am. I saved him because it was right, because I would not stand by while someone I care for suffered." The whispers grew louder, shocked murmurs, disbelief rippling through the crowd. Sheriff's smirk faltered slightly. She continued, gaze sweeping across every face. "All my life, I've been told I'm less worthy, less capable, less enough, but today I proved to myself that worth is not measured by laughter or mockery. It is measured by courage, by heart, by action." A few townsfolk nodded, hesitant but inspired. The preacher's lips pressed together, eyes glistening. Even Luke's nieces sat straighter. Why? Died proud. Sheriff cleared his throat, voice rising. Words are easy. But did you truly risk yourself? Or is this just another story to soften your reputation? Maybelle's eyes met his, unwavering. I risked everything, my life, my pride, my fear, and I did it without asking for your approval. The hall was quiet, tension hanging thick. Luke stepped forward, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. She speaks the truth, he said, voice steady, commanding attention. She saved my life. She stood when fire and storm threatened everything I had. She showed more bravery than any of us here, even you, Sheriff, can't deny it. A murmur ran through the pews, disbelief tangled with awe. Maybelle's heart beat rapidly, not with fear, but with release. For the first time, she felt the weight of shame lift, replaced with something lighter, stronger justice. The sheriff's jaw tightened. Words failed him. He looked away, muttering under his breath, the toothpick dropping forgotten to the floor. The preacher cleared his throat, voice breaking, as he addressed the congregation. Perhaps the Lord sees beauty not in our faces, but in our deeds. Maybelle blinked, tears welling but held back, her voice trembling with quiet triumph. The room, once heavy with judgment, now seemed to exhale slowly, a collective breath of acknowledgement. Luke squeezed her shoulder. See, they're starting to understand. She looked at him, voice low. Not yet, but soon. The congregation shifted, whispers replaced with silent nods. For the first time, Maybelle felt the power of moral truth standing beside her, steady and unyielding. The murmurs rippled through the congregation like wind through dry grass, shifting uneasily under the weight of truth. Maybelle stood beside Luke, her posture firm, hands clasped loosely in front of her, eyes scanning the faces she had once feared. The sheriff cleared his throat, sharp, forced confidence in his voice. Luke Carver, did you marry this woman out of pity? Or have you lost your senses entirely? Luke straightened, voice cold and deliberate. I married her because she's brave, because she has a heart stronger than most men I know, because she saved my life and mine alone isn't the only one she's saved. A gasp ran through the pews. Even the preacher paused, lips parted in disbelief. Maybelle's eyes met Luke's, a silent pulse of gratitude passing between them. The courage to speak the truth had begun with her, but it would be reinforced by him, the man she had come to trust. Luke continued, voice resonant, unwavering. She risked herself in the fire, in the storm. She faced every fear head on, and she did it with no thought of glory or reward. That is the measure of her worth, not your laughter, not your mocking, not your shallow judgment. The congregation shifted, heads nodding, shoulders straightening. Even the townsfolk who had jeered earlier could not deny the weight of his words. The sheriff's jaw tightened, lips pressed in a thin line. He sputtered, searching for a retort, but the fire of truth burned too brightly. Preacher stepped forward, voice trembling but firm. The Lord sees all, brothers and sisters. He sees courage where we may have only mocked, and he sees beauty not in the shape of a body, but in the strength of deeds and heart. Today, that truth stands before us. Maybelle's chest rose and fell, tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. The release of shame, humiliation, and doubt washed over her in a quiet tide. The two nieces, sitting on the edge of the pew, whispered to one another, Aunt Belle, you're amazing. Yes, the younger one said, eyes shining, you're brave. Luke watched her, pride etched across his rugged face. The woman they had laughed at, scorned, whispered about behind closed doors, she had become a testament to courage and honor. The sheriff slumped into his seat, silent for the first time in years. The townsfolk avoided his eyes, their whispers now laced with admiration rather than derision. The moral tide had shifted, and even the proudest men could not resist its pull. Maybelle stepped forward, voice soft but clear. "I am not here to prove myself to anyone," she said. "I am here because truth cannot be hidden by mockery. Courage cannot be dismissed by ridicule, and kindness is never wasted." The congregation exhaled, the tension breaking, replaced by quiet awe. Luke squeezed her hand lightly, grounding her in the moment. Even the preacher nodded, voice gentle now. "Let all who have ears hear. Let all who have hearts understand. Today, we witness righteousness in action, not in words." The girls ran to her, hugging her tightly, laughter spilling through the church like sunlight through storm clouds. Maybelle embraced them, a smile curving her lips, tears of relief and triumph slipping down her cheeks. Luke stepped closer, brushing damp hair from her forehead. "You were brave today," he said, voice low, steady. "Not for me, not for them, for yourself." "I've never felt braver," she whispered, "but I've also never felt more seen." The town had witnessed courage, honesty, and moral truth. Shame had been replaced with respect. Laughter had given way to acknowledgement. The storm outside had passed, but the storm of judgment and prejudice that had ruled the town was finally breaking, and in that breaking, a new order began, one where deeds mattered more than appearance, where heart mattered more than mockery. Maybelle breathed deeply, eyes shining, feeling the first real sense of freedom she had ever known. Morning light spilled over the valley like honey, warm and golden, illuminating fields still wet from dawn's dew. The ranch was quiet, peaceful, almost reverent after the chaos and judgment of the past weeks. Maybelle stepped outside, barefoot on the soft grass, feeling it yield beneath her feet. She drew a deep breath, inhaling the scent of wet earth and wildflowers. This was her world now, no longer a place of mockery or shame. Luke emerged from the house, hat in hand, eyes soft but steady. He didn't speak immediately, letting the quiet morning carry its own weight. He watched her, the woman who had endured fire, storm, and the town's scorn, now standing tall in the light of a new day. "You ready?" he asked finally, voice calm, warm. "For what?" she replied, turning to him, curiosity and caution in her gaze. "To live," he said simply, "to really live. No shame, no fear." The two nieces ran across the yard, white ribbons trailing behind them, laughter spilling into the morning air. They tugged at Maybelle's skirts, hugging her tightly. "You're the best, Aunt Belle," they cried. Maybelle laughed softly, brushing hair from her face. She looked at Luke, seeing not just the rancher, not just the man she had learned to trust, but someone who had become her anchor in this valley of wind, dust, and judgment. Weeks had passed since the barn burned, since the trial of courage and truth had unfolded. The town that had mocked her now brought pies, smiles, and quiet nods of respect. It was a slow transformation, but one she welcomed. The laughter that once cut her to the bone now carried warmth and inclusion. Luke stepped closer, hands brushing hers. He led her toward the old oak on the hill, the same tree under which he had buried his first wife, a place sacred, solemn, and ripe with new beginnings. "I wanted you to see this first," he said, voice steady, "here where life begins again." Maybelle's heart beat rapidly. She understood the gravity of this moment, but also the simplicity. Love reborn doesn't need ceremony. It only needs truth and courage. Luke knelt beneath the oak, pulling a small ring from his pocket. "Maybelle Hargrove," he began, voice unwavering, "I've seen you stand in fire, face storms, and endure the cruelty of the world with more grace than anyone I've known. I don't want you to be anyone else. I want you to be here with me always." Maybelle's eyes glistened with tears, a smile curving her lips. She shook her head, barely able to speak. I don't know what to say." "Say yes," he whispered, hand trembling slightly as he offered her the ring. She looked at the valley, the girls, the ranch, the town slowly stirring in the distance. She looked at him, the man who had seen her worth when no one else would. "Yes," she breathed, voice catching, steadying with certainty. "Yes, Luke." The girls squealed, dancing in circles, ribbons twirling, laughter ringing through the morning. Maybelle laughed with them, free and unburdened. The town's roofs glinted in the sun, distant figures waving quietly, acknowledging her courage and endurance. Luke rose, slipping the ring on to her finger. He pulled her into a gentle embrace, the warmth of his body grounding her in this moment of peace and love. The oak above them stretched its branches toward the sun, strong and unwavering, a mirror of the strength Maybelle had discovered within herself. The ranch, once a place of labor and survival, now felt like home, alive with possibility, laughter, and the quiet rhythm of hearts learning to trust. Maybelle stepped back, looking around at the valley stretching endlessly before her. She had endured humiliation, fire, storm, and the harsh judgment of the world. And now she stood radiant, scarred, and strong, no longer just the fat girl they mocked, but a woman who had stayed when others ran. The morning unfolded slowly, golden light spilling over the valley, painting the fields in warmth. Maybelle sat on the porch, the two girls at her feet, weaving ribbons into their hair. The quiet hum of life surrounded her, a rhythm she had never known before, steady, gentle, unthreatening. Luke emerged from the house, carrying fresh coffee, eyes soft as they met hers. "Thought you might like this," he said, voice low, calm. She smiled, taking the cup. "Thank you." It was simple, ordinary, yet for her, it felt like a crown. Ordinary moments, she realized, could hold more dignity than a lifetime of mockery ever had. The town began to stir in the distance. Farmers tended their fields, women called to one another across fences, children ran laughing along dusty roads. Some came bearing gifts, pies, jars of preserves, even small bouquets of wildflowers. For the first time, she didn't flinch, she didn't shrink. She accepted their offerings with quiet grace, a small smile and a nod. The girls danced around her, ribbons flying, voices bright and clear. "Do it again, Aunt Belle," they cried. She laughed, her voice carrying across the yard, full and warm. Her laughter was not a shield against cruelty anymore. It was a reflection of who she had become, strong, seen, valued. Luke joined them, scooping the youngest into his arms. "You're a natural at this," he said, glancing at Maybelle. She shook her head, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Not natural," she said softly. "I had to learn every day." He nodded, understanding. "And you did. You still do." Later, the three of them walked through the fields, the girls skipping ahead. The townspeople watched from afar, some hesitating, some smiling quietly. The ones who had mocked her, laughed at her, whispered cruelly behind closed doors. They now saw her courage, her heart, and the truth could not be denied. Maybelle paused on a hilltop, looking back at the valley she had once feared. Her voice broke the quiet morning, soft and reflective. "They laughed once, but now they come to my door for kindness. They didn't see me before, not really, but now I see myself." Luke stood beside her, hand brushing hers. "Good," he said, voice low, steady. "You should see yourself as I see you, brave, strong, unyielding." The girls ran ahead, voices carried on the breeze, laughter blending with the rustle of grass and the soft hum of bees. Maybelle watched them, chest swelling with something she had never felt in the town she had left behind. Peace. The valley stretched endlessly, hills rolling under sunlight, the air fragrant with dew and wildflowers. The ranch, the home she had built through courage, endurance, and love, now pulsed with life and hope. She had endured humiliation, storm, fire, and judgment. She had stood firm when others faltered, and in that morning, as the sun climbed higher, she understood fully. She was no longer the fat girl they had mocked. She was the woman who had stayed, the woman who had faced fire, storm, and prejudice, and had risen stronger, kinder, and radiant. Luke's arm slipped around her shoulders, a quiet anchor. She leaned into him, breathing in fresh, wild air of the valley, letting the peace settle in her bones. For the first time in her life, she felt wholly, completely herself.